Over the past few years, I've gradually lost interest in the German DLC for Train Simulator in favour of its Train Sim World counterparts, but there is at least one German TS Classic route that I still like, and that's the Frankfurt U-Bahn. This is a s-bahn system in the city of Frankfurt am Main, and it has an unusual combination of underground sections in the city centre, along with street running or dedicated alignments as you get further out into the suburbs. The network runs on 1435mm standard gauge track and is electrified at 600 volts direct current from overhead wires. The U-Bahn Frankfurt add-on was first released in 2015, but received a major update in November 2018. These days, the route is still available to purchase either from Just Trains' website or on Steam. I got the JT version in December 2018, but that now costs a staggering $47 or $81.84 NZD at full price. The Steam version is much cheaper, with a full price of only 50 New Zealand dollars. As for rolling stock, this route offers pretty good variation because it comes with the Duwag U3, Siemens U4, and Bombardier Flexity Swift U5 electric multiple units, which date back to 1979, 1994, and 2008 respectively. Typically, the Frankfurt U-Bahn trains are simple two-car units with a cab at each end, but the U5 breaks from this tradition by having three different variants. There's the U5-25, a standard two-car set with a cab at each end, the U5-50, a two-car set with only one cab, and the U5-100, a two-car set with no cab at all. Regarding the U5-50, this can only be used if it's coupled to another U5-50 set facing the opposite direction, with the end result being something that looks like a big four-car set. Incidentally, while all three units are supplied in the standard Verkehrsgesellschaft Frankfurt am Main Subaru Vista Blue livery, you get one extra livery for the U3 in the form of this older orange and ivory. As far as I know, this is the first livery carried by the U3s upon their entry into service in 1980. As for the so-called U5-100, this variant is not in Train Simulator because it didn't exist yet when the Frankfurt U-Bahn add-on was made. The U5-100 sets can be coupled in between a pair of U5-50 sets, thus creating a longer walk-through train that's either 75 or 100 meters long. There's also an AI-only version of the Deutsche Bahn BR423 included, but only for use on the S-Bahn tracks between Hauptwache and Konstablerwache, where they run in between the comparatively tiny U-Bahn trains on lines U6 and U7. There's a separately sold add-on that features drivable BR423s on S-Bahn Rhein-Main lines S5 and S6. The former goes to Friedrichsdorf, a town known as the headquarters of Dingo Pictures. If you know, you know. Thinking back to the idea of AI-only stock, you even get a basic version of the Type S tram with the Frankfurt U-Bahn pack. The Type S is mainly used at Ginheim, where tram line 16 meets U-Bahn lines U1 and U9. Lastly, you also get low-poly versions of the U3, U4, and U5 trains to place in the depot sidings at Hedernheim, Bommersheim, and Betriebshof Ost. That third one is near Schäfflerstrasse station on lines U4 and U7. The thing with these low-poly models is that they're not classed as proper rolling stock in the scenario editor. Instead, they're classed as scenic assets. This means that it can be a bit tedious to place them down in the scenario editor.
Nächste Station, Zoo. Sie befinden sich in einem Zug der Linie U7. Zur Weiterfahrt in Richtung Ostbahnhof mit der Linie U6 bitte hier umsteigen. Umsteigemöglichkeit zur Straßenbahnlinie 14. Ausstieg in Fahrtrichtung links.
It's also worth mentioning that all 3 drivable trains included with this route feature a functioning passenger information system. I'll probably butcher the pronunciation, but I believe it's called Integriertes Bordinformationssystem, or IBIS, or IBIS for short. The English translation is Integrated Onboard Information System, and soon I will demonstrate how to set up the unit's control desk and how to program the IBIS system, but I recommend reading the manual for details on all the cab controls. And before I forget, here is a map of the U-Bahn Frankfurt network. Out of all the 86 stations, only 27 of them are underground. It's interesting to note that Schweizerplatz and Südbahnhof are the only stations located south of the Main River, and you may also notice just how inconsistent the station spacing is once you get further out on lines U2, U3, and U9. I never had the original version of this route, only the updated version called U-Bahn Frankfurt 2. I don't know all the changes that were made, but I do know that the U4 and U5 trains now have white text on their destination displays, as opposed to the original green text, and that Musterschule and Glaubergstrasse stations on line U5 are depicted in their rebuilt state, complete with staggered high-level platforms. Until around 2016, Musterschule and Glaubergstrasse were essentially just bus stops that could also be served by the U-Bahn services. The lack of high-level platforms meant that, for the longest time, the only rolling stock that could run on line U5 were the old PTB trams, which had fold-out steps. For reference, the U5 line runs for 7.6 kilometers from Hauptbahnhof to Preungersheim, sharing tracks with line U4 as far east as Konstablerwache. As for the PTB, and where I got this thing, she was an acquisition from a website called Rail Traction, where I also found the Duwag U2, but it appears that the PTB and U2 are no longer available. For people that did manage to get these units, they are both still drivable on the U-Bahn Frankfurt 2 route, but the problem is that they do not have functioning announcements or dynamic pantographs. The latter makes the units look ridiculous when running underground. They also have a different setup procedure from the U3, U4 and U5, which is hard for me to remember because I hardly ever drive the PTB and U2. Here we are in the reversing siding at Riedberg to demonstrate how to set up the train herself, as well as the IBIS system. All 3 trains included with this route have the same keyboard controls and setup process, and said process is very easy to remember once you get the hang of it. After pressing 1 to enter the cab view, you can start by pressing the E, P, left square bracket, and right square bracket keys in that specific order. Then you should press V to turn on the passenger saloon lights, although incidentally, I sometimes forget to do that myself. Next, move down to the IBIS screen and press the Kurs button, followed by any 2 of the numbers on the keypad. This is the train number. Then, press the Linie button and 9 on the keypad, followed by a second digit which depends on the line you're running on. In this case, we needed to press the number 8 after 9 because we're on line U8. In the external view, we can see that U8, or as they say in German, U8, has appeared on the destination display, and that the driver figure looks like Trigger from Only Fools and Horses. Anyway, we now need to press that Seal button, then the 3-digit codes for the starting and destination stations on our journey. In this case, the codes are 779 for Riedberg and 712 for Zuidbahnhof. Once both codes are entered, press the arrow button to get the station list to appear on the screen. The announcements are not automatic, so as you leave a station, you will need to press Q to play the announcement for the next station.
Nächste Station, Unicampus Riedberg. Ausstieg in Fahrtrichtung rechts.
Incidentally, the U4 and U5 both feature lists of destination codes above their windscreens, but the U3 does not, so you'll need to remember what codes to set before loading a scenario with the U3. Incidentally, the default scenarios for this older unit are only on lines U4, U6 and U7, but I believe that was realistic. As for the Siemens U4, she is only used on lines U1, U2, U3, U8 and U9, while the Flexity Swift U5 is used across all 9 lines.
Nächste Station, Heddernheimer Landstraße. Sie befinden sich in einem Zug der Linie U1. Zur Weiterfahrt in Richtung Niedereschbach mit der Linie U9 bitte hier umsteigen. Ausstieg in Fahrtrichtung rechts.
Each of the 3 trains included with this route is distinctly different from the other 2, with the U5 being my favourite member of the fleet. Here's a demonstration of each unit's distinctive traction motor sounds. And personally, I think the Siemens U4 sounds a little bit like a microwave. The vast majority of stations on this network only have their announcements in German, but the stations between Konstablerwache and Bockenheimer Warte on line U4 also have English announcements. If anyone knows why those 6 stations get the extra announcements in English, please tell us in the comments.
Nächste Station, Hauptbahnhof. Umsteigemöglichkeit zu den Regional- und Fernzügen, zu den S-Bahn-Linien S1 bis S9, zu den Straßenbahnlinien 11, 12, 16, 17 und 21 sowie zu den Buslinien 33, 35, 37, 46 und 64. Ausstieg in Fahrtrichtung rechts. Next station, Central Railway Station. Change here for long-distance trains, regional trains, suburban trains S1 to S9, tram lines 11, 12, 16, 17 and 21, and bus lines 33, 35, 37, 46 and 64. Exit on the right. Bitte achten Sie auf die Stufe zwischen dem Zug und dem Bahnsteig. Please mind the step between the train and the platform.
I should also mention the stop markers, which drivers should aim to stop the front of their train on. H is for 2-car trains, H2 is for 4-car trains, H3 for 6-car trains, and H4 for 8-car trains. If the platform only has an H marker, that means all trains must stop there regardless of their length. One place where you can find the basic H marker is the northbound platform at Bonamy's Mitte on lines U2 and U9. I noticed that, for some reason, the southbound platform at this station has all the H1 through H4 markers. All but 3 lines on this network have at least one station that's exclusively served by them. The exceptions are U1, U8 and U9, whose stations are all shared with other lines. As I've said in a previous video, U4 and U3 are my favourite lines on the network, but that's not to say that I'm not interested in the others. Each of the 9 lines is still unique in its own right. For example, line U1, which runs for 12.3 kilometers from Südbahnhof to Ginnheim, is the only one to have multiple underground sections. Initially, the line is underground between Südbahnhof and Mikkel Ardikes Allee, then surfaces just before Dornbusch. U1 then stays above ground for almost the entire rest of the way to Ginnheim, except for another underground section through Nordwestzentrum. Driving on the Frankfurt U-Bahn can be difficult, because you have to deal with stations that are very close together, sometimes less than 500 meters apart, and these trains can accelerate and decelerate rather quickly, so make sure to ease back on the throttle as you get closer to the speed limit, so as not to break the speed limit. Incidentally, and although it's not my personal favourite, U9 is perhaps the most bizarre line on the Frankfurt U-Bahn for a few reasons. It's the only line on this network that doesn't serve the city centre. It's the only one to just use the little 2-car sets on their own, and it only has one underground station, namely Nordwestzentrum. The other 11 stations on this line are all above ground, and for reference, U9 runs for 10.3 kilometers from Ginnheim to Nieder-Eschbach. I should also mention that lines U2 and U4 are the only ones on this network to regularly use full-length 8-car trains, although U2 generally only uses them at peak times, and only 6-car trains for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, line U5 will often run with shorter 4-car trains, and the other 6 run with 6-car trains most of the time. The Frankfurt U-Bahn's rolling stock is noticeably smaller than normal mainline trains, but they're not quite as small as trams. They're a bit of a confusing middle ground, in a sense. Besides its status as a complete network with a combination of underground stations, street running sections, and dedicated alignments, another selling point for the Frankfurt U-Bahn is the highly detailed stations. As for which one is my favourite, that's a tie between Zoo and Westend, mainly for the pretty animal-themed artwork at the former, and the latter's architecture reminding me of the Berlin U-Bahn, as it appears in World of Subways 2. For reference, Zoo and Westend are both on a section used by lines U6 and U7. This route in TS Classic is somewhat out of date now, because it depicts lines U6 and U7 as they were before they swapped western termini in December 2018. U6 originally went up the Heerstrasse branch, while U7 originally went up the shorter branch to Hausen. Following the change in 2018, U7 now goes to Heerstrasse and U6 goes to Hausen. Why this change was made in the first place is beyond me. As for their eastern termini, U7 still goes to Enkheim and U6 still goes to Ostbahnhof. One of the few things I dislike about this add-on is the somewhat lifeless atmosphere of some above-ground sections, especially lines U6 and U7 north of Industriehof. That's the first above-ground station after leaving Kirchplatz. After you leave Industriehof, the track runs on its own dedicated alignment between two halves of a road, just like the section of lines U1, U2, U3 and U8 between Dornbusch and Weisserstein. While there's generally a pretty busy rail scene in the default scenarios, it clashes with the complete lack of NPCs going along the footpaths, and, in the case of the northern sections of lines U6 and U7, not a single vehicle moving along the adjacent road. Unfortunately, this second version of the Frankfurt U-Bahn route doesn't include any round-trip scenarios, only one-way scenarios. As much as I like revisiting the default scenarios, it's disappointing to not being able to do round trips in them. The only way you could would be in a custom free roam or standard scenario. As for what's actually in the included scenarios, it's only regular passenger services, and none of them involve empty stock movements to and from the depot. One of the good things about the included scenarios is that you don't have to stick to a precise timetable in them, although it's best to set up your train and get moving as quickly as you can so that you can see the other AI trains in the right places at the right times. The busiest part of the network is easily the section from Südbahnhof to Heidenheim, which is shared by lines U1, U2, U3 and U8. U2 branches off at Heidenheim and goes to its northern terminus at Bad Homburg-Gonsenheim, while U1 branches off just beyond Seilweg and U8 branches off at Niederursel, leaving the section up to Oberursel-Hohemark as exclusive to the U3 service. In summary, the Frankfurt U-Bahn is an excellent route with an interesting non-linear layout, plenty of scenery variation, and a good rolling stock selection. I've had this add-on for over 6 years now, and can safely say that I've got my money's worth. I can easily recommend Urban Train Sim's Frankfurt U-Bahn to other TS Classic players who like high-density suburban or metro-style routes, and would go so far as to give this add-on a 9 out of 10.